Iran lays traps and fortifies Kharg Island ahead of a potential U.S. ground assault. The breaking intelligence. Iran has been laying traps and moving additional military personnel and air defenses to Kharg Island in recent weeks, in preparation for a possible U.S. operation to take control of the island, according to multiple people familiar with U.S. intelligence reporting on the issue. This is a dramatic escalation in what is already a volatile and fast-moving conflict in the Persian Gulf. Sources told CNN that Tehran has deployed additional portable missile systems and laid mines along the shoreline of Kharg Island. Iran has also been laying traps, including anti-personnel and anti-armor mines around the island, sources told CNN. Why Kharg Island matters so much. Kharg Island lies roughly 20 miles off Iran's northern Gulf coast. For decades, it has served as Iran's main oil export terminal, historically handling 85 to 95% of the country's crude exports. Tankers load up on the island before heading through the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The island contains large oil storage facilities connected by pipelines to Iran's largest oil and gas fields. The island hosts three main energy infrastructure sites, including Falat Iran Oil Company, which produces 500,000 barrels of crude oil per day, as well as Kharg Petrochemical Company. In short, Kharg is Iran's economic jugular vein. Seizing it or permanently degrading it would bleed Tehran's war chest dry. How we got here. The U.S. strikes of March 13th. On March 13, 2026, the U.S. Air Force conducted a large bombing raid on Kharg Island. The strikes targeted more than 90 Iranian military sites, but spared oil and gas infrastructure. U.S. Central Command said the precision strike hit 90 Iranian military targets while preserving the oil infrastructure. Naval mine storage facilities and missile storage bunkers were among the targets destroyed. President Trump announced the strike boastfully, but with a calculated warning. Our weapons are the most powerful and sophisticated that the world has ever known, but for reasons of decency, I have chosen not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island. However, if Iran or anyone else do anything to interfere with the free and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I will immediately reconsider this decision. The strike was described as a shot across the bow to convince the Iranians to reopen the strait, but it was also a preparatory step to degrade Iran's military capabilities on the island and lay the groundwork for a potential ground operation. Iran's defensive buildup. What intelligence is seeing? Iran has not sat idle. The Iranians have moved additional shoulder-fired surface-to-air guided missile systems, known as MANPADS, to the island. These are man-portable, low-altitude anti-aircraft weapons that are notoriously difficult to neutralize from the air and are lethal to helicopters and low-flying aircraft, precisely the assets the U.S. would use in an airborne or amphibious assault. The vital island has been heavily fortified with military defenses, including long-range radar, surface-to-air missile batteries, anti-aircraft artillery, IRGC naval vessels, anti-ship missile sites, and various command centers and weapons storage bunkers. Since the Iran-Iraq War, Tehran has heavily fortified Kharg with air defenses, hardened structures, and underground storage tanks, designed to ensure crude exports can continue even under sustained military assault. Another person familiar with U.S. military planning said that near constant and persistent overhead surveillance of the island, so the military has been able to see both physical and environmental changes in areas that appear to have been laid with traps. The U.S. ground operation being considered. The Trump administration is considering plans to occupy or blockade Iran's Kharg Island to pressure Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. An operation to take over Kharg Island, which sits 15 miles offshore and processes 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, could put U.S. troops more directly in the line of fire. Such an operation would only be launched after the U.S. military further degrades Iran's military capacity around the Strait of Hormuz. One source with knowledge of the White House thinking put it bluntly: "We need about a month to weaken the Iranians more with strikes, take the island, and then get them by the balls and use it for negotiations." Approximately 1,000 U.S. soldiers with the Army's 82nd Airborne Division are expecting to deploy to the region in the coming days, a significant signal of intent, even if no final decision has been made. The enormous risks. Military experts are sounding the alarm loudly. CNN's military analyst, retired Admiral James Stavridis, warned about the grave risks of a ground operation, arguing that Iranians are clever and ruthless, and that Iranian forces would do everything they can to inflict maximum casualties on American troops. U.S. officials and military experts say there would be significant risks involved in such a ground operation, including a large number of U.S. casualties. The island has layered defenses, and even with the strikes already conducted, U.S. forces would still be vulnerable to Iranian ballistic missile and drone attacks, given the island's proximity to the Iranian coast. It would require a major military land operation to take a well-fortified territory, 1/3 the size of Manhattan. Foreign Affairs. An Israelite source conveyed stark concern. The hope is that they won't take that risk and instead will fire at the oil fields, but there is no way to know. I would be very worried about this. There is also an Iran countermove scenario. If we seize Kharg Island, they're going to turn off the spigot on the other end. It's not like we control their oil production. Gulf allies are deeply nervous. Gulf allies are privately urging the Trump administration against prolonging the war by putting boots on the ground to occupy Kharg Island. The concern is that occupying Kharg Island with U.S. troops would result in high casualties, likely triggering Iranian retaliation against Gulf countries' infrastructure and prolonging the conflict. Instead, Gulf nations are pressing U.S. officials on the need to dismantle Iran's ballistic missile program before the conflict ends. This regional anxiety is grounded in recent precedent. After Israel's strikes on Iran's South Pars gas field, Iran retaliated by targeting Qatar's liquefied natural gas infrastructure, knocking out 17% of its production capacity for 3 to 5 years. An attack on Kharg might trigger an even more aggressive Iranian response of this kind. The Iwo Jima comparison and the backlash. The debate has spilled into Congress. Senator Lindsey Graham urged President Trump to order U.S. Marines to seize Kharg Island, invoking one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. "We did Iwo Jima, we can do this, my money is always on the Marines," Graham said on Fox News Sunday. The comparison drew fierce backlash. The fight for Iwo Jima raged for 36 days and produced staggering losses. American forces suffered more than 26,000 casualties, including nearly 7,000 killed. Japanese forces of roughly 20,000 soldiers fought from an elaborate network of underground tunnels and fortified bunkers, refusing to surrender. Fewer than 1,100 of them survived. Critics seized on this history as precisely the reason a Kharg ground assault would be catastrophic, not inspirational. What comes next? One military expert said it was more likely that after about 2 more weeks of attacks to degrade Iran's capabilities, the U.S. would send destroyers and aircraft into the strait to escort tankers, eliminating the need for an invasion. Iran's military could continue to strike U.S. bases across the Gulf, increase attacks by allied militias in Iraq and elsewhere, and keep striking vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, using fast attack boats, naval mines, and suicide drones, regardless of what happens on Kharg. The war is now entering its most dangerous phase. Iran is digging in, the U.S. is watching from above, and the world's oil markets, with crude prices soaring back over $100 a barrel, are hanging on every move. Whether the Trump administration ultimately pulls the trigger on a ground operation may be the single most consequential military decision of this conflict.